talk about the the metaphysical aspect of the heart as a organ in the Chinese understanding. As we've discussed in previous lectures, this character Shun, this concept Shun, it can be translated as heart, but it can also be translated as mind. So the Chinese didn't really make a clear distinction between the heart and the mind. In one sense they did. They talked about the Xin Zang, Zang being like a visceral organ, a solid organ. When they used that term, Xin Zang, it was referring to the organ that's in the chest. Zang, that character, has the flesh radical, and then the character for a storehouse or a treasury. So it was like a fleshly repository for the Xin, for the heart. But in chapter 8 of the Su one, it talks about Xinzhi, just the heart all on its own. It's not talking about the Xin Zang, just talking about Xinzhi, that heart there. And as with previous lectures in this series, because October is Poetry Month, I thought I would start off with a poem that touches on some of the ideas that I'm going to be discussing here in this lecture. And because we're getting close to Halloween and the spooky spirit is upon us, I started reading some Edgar Allan Poe, looking for something. But then I fell back on my favorite poet, Emily Dickinson, and I found a really spooky poem by her that I think fits very nicely with the theme of today's talk. So many of you have probably come across this poem or heard it, but I'm going to read it here to you today. I tried to print it out, but my printer was malfunctioning, so I'm just going to rely on my phone here. So the title of this poem is Ghosts by Emily Dickinson. One need not be a chamber to be haunted. One need not be a house. The brain has corridors surpassing material place. Far safer of a midnight meeting, external ghost, than an interior confronting that whiter host. Far safer through an abbey gallop, the stones a chase, than moonless one's own self encounter in lonesome place. Our self behind our self concealed should startle most. Assassin hid in our apartment, be horror's least. The prudent carries a revolver, he bolts the door, or looking a superior specter more near. That's spooky, I think. Aptly named Ghosts. And here when we're talking about, where she's talking about ghosts, it seems to me that she's talking about what exists in our own minds. And she even says, the brain has corridors surpassing material place. So she pictures the brain as a place with all these corridors. And then within it, there's sort of a ghost that we can encounter that really can create, something shocking, but the shocking or scary. But here, what's so shocking is our self behind ourself concealed. So that thing within ourselves that's inside ourselves. And this to me really, I think, fits with this notion of Xin, of heart, because we have, in our brains, we have these neuronal pathways, all these neurons that are connecting one another. But there is a particular way that these neurons are excited, or the way that they feed back on themselves, that creates this sense of self, our actual consciousness. So each of us, as we're sitting here, is looking out at the world, and we're creating this world within a world, right? So I have my world right now as I'm looking out at you. Each of you have your world. We all have this elaborate kind of past and future, this kind of history and all of our dreams and thoughts and plans. But those are all existing somehow within this pattern of electrochemical excitation in the brain, and that somehow creates our self. So I wanted first to talk about this term, Xing er Shang. Write a little smaller. So this Xing or Shang. Xing, this character usually refers to as form. It's like a physical form. R is like a connecting particle of speech in classical Chinese. It could be translated as and or also. And then Shang means like above or kind of superior to. This character R, it appears a lot, and it used to be written something like a string with lots of other little strings on it. And one idea here, and the idea that I think is probably the strongest, what this is a picture of, has anyone ever heard of a quipu? It was a system of writing that was used in the Incan Empire, but it was actually used, it was found throughout the world. They would have one long string, and then they would have strings of various lengths on it with knots and things. And it was used as sort of a mnemonic for language. So they could use it to act as like a memory tool for written prose or for a conversation, for things like that. And so in that you have a line and another line and another line. It strings together these ideas. This part of speech in classical Chinese, it kind of plays the role of what a quipu does, where it strings together these ideas. In any case, form, yet or but, and also above. That term, Xing or Shang, it's translated often as metaphysical or abstract. And Dr. Liu, in his book, Classical Chinese Medicine, which I've talked about a number of times in previous lectures, he talks about the heart as being the one organ which is Xing or Shang, which is metaphysical, it's abstract. And one of the reasons one of the ways he supports this idea is this character, Shin. It doesn't have this flesh radical. This looks like a moon. It looks like the moon radical, but it used to be written something like this. Almost looks like a cut of meat or fish or something like that. So with all of the other organs, for instance, with the spleen, you have this character, Bei, and then together with the flesh radical, that makes a spleen. This isn't a picture of any part of the body. This is just kind of like a conceptual idea or a theme. Similarly, you have this character here, Gan, which is liver. It's the flesh that does this type of function in the body. This Gan character was originally written like this. It was some sort of weapon that was held on a stick that had a long rope with weights on it, and they would use it to catch animals, but they would also use it in warfare. It was a way to disable your opponent without killing them, which was kind of like the highest ideal in Chinese warfare, was to be able to intercept or capture your opponent, but without necessarily harming them, because harming them, of course, would simply create more difficulty. When you look at the role of the liver in the body, that's what it does. It detoxifies things. So we eat all of the food that we eat, the nutrients and whatnot, except for short-chain fatty acids and water and a few other innocuous things. They all first go to the liver, and the liver then captures them, does things to them, conjugates them, renders toxins harmless, creates food and sugars and whatnot, sort of packages them so that they can be shipped off elsewhere. In any case, I'm kind of digressing, but my main point is all of the other organs, they'll have this flesh radical and then kind of a theoretical theme or a concept that relates to the function of that organ in the body. Only the heart is actually like a picture of the organ itself. So this is sort of how it was written earlier. There's in other texts it's shown like this, kind of like the chambers of the heart with the aorta. Another version in the oracle bone script shows the heart like this. It's more elaborate. I mean, only in that the lines themselves have more character to them. But here you maybe have like the chambers of the heart. But there isn't a flesh radical that's placed with it. It stands all on its own. And it is a picture of the Shin Sang, of the organ that's related to the heart, but it's not actually related to the form, to the flesh. It really is this Shin or Sha. It really is sort of metaphysical or abstract. This character here, Xing, in the earlier forms, it was some sort of framework or something like that with these lines indicating like a cloth or something. I have to do more research on this character. I looked at it a little bit in preparation for this lecture, but I didn't find enough to really give you an idea. In any case, it was sort of seen as like a physical form, some sort of physical framework. So in thinking about the heart or the mind, it really is something that doesn't have a physical structure to it. Yes, you could take the brain out of a dead body, and you could say, well, somewhere in these kind of neuronal pathways, you had the experience of life or of consciousness, but that lump of neurons and whatnot doesn't really explain our particular frame of consciousness that we experience at each moment. So, for instance, if you were to shut your eyes and very vividly imagine something, let's say you're listening to a book on tape or you're listening to a piece of music, and you free your mind up, you can actually experience something that has nothing to do with where you are at that moment. Alternatively, you can jump into a cold lake and you can really be kind of tied to what your senses are engaged with right at that moment. You can enter the same room 5 times, the exact same room. Nothing had moved. But each time you enter it, you may be looking for something different. You may be entering the room to do something differently. You may be in a different mindset. It may simply be a different day, a different time of year, and the room is completely different, even though the sensory input that's going into your brain is essentially identical at that time. So what causes these different kind of frameworks, these different sort of frames of experience in our brains? The neurons, of course, themselves over time, over the period of, say minutes or hours or days, they can reshape themselves and these pathways can change. So over the course of years, the neuronal pathways that we have in our brain, that circuitry of nerves, does change. But how does it change from 1 minute to the next? How can you be sitting there, totally calm, totally relaxed, and then realize, I don't think I have my phone on? You don't know where your phone or your keys or your wallet is. And suddenly, your mind is racing. You're thinking back on all these different places that you had been before. And very vividly, you're trying to remember. Your heart starts to beat, your breathing changes. There can be all these sort of changes there. What's happening when that happens? So we have recurrently come back to the organelle of the mitochondria in discussing the heart. So for those of you who weren't at my previous lectures in this series or earlier lectures that I've given, in my own belief, at the cellular level of the body, if this is sort of the inside of a cell, and say you have the nucleus and these other organelles, at the cellular level, you have sort of a recreation of the entirety of the human body. So this concept of the microcosm reflecting the macrocosm is one that pervades early Chinese thought. So to the early Chinese thinker, you could look at the person of the form of the human being, and from them you could derive a picture of the entire cosmos. So the head, which is round, and the eyes, which see light, and all these things that are up in the senses, it related to the heavens. The feet, which are on the ground, that the bones of which are very square and solid, those were related to the earth. And this cosmological model of the earth as the circle and the square was reflected in the actual anatomy of the human body. Likewise, the individual organs related to particular seasons, to particular directions on the compass. So the heart was related to the south, was related to summer. The kidneys were related to winter and were related to the north. Time and place even, the north was like winter. So time and place were also confounded and intertwined. If you wanted to know something about winter, you could simply go to the north. If you wanted to know something about summer, you could go to the south. Likewise, the east was related to the liver and the west to the lungs. But where I'm going with that is, in my own thinking, as I was a student in grad school, studying Chinese medicine along with naturopathic medicine and learning about these particular theories, when we got to talking about the kind of cellular biology, it was very difficult not to start trying to interpreting the individual organelles. Organelles are these very small, microscopic, so on the range of, like 8 or 10 microns across, 8 or 10 nanometers across. These tiny little organelles that exist within each cell, but which allow the cell to function almost as an independent entity. And when we're talking about the health of the body, it's very important that each cell work well and socialize well with all the other cells, because if it breaks off and tries to do its own thing and kind of live its life independent of the body, that's when cancer develops and the cell kind of grows out of control and refuses to die over time. So in looking at these organelles, I was immediately kind of baffled as to what necessarily the role of the heart was in the organs. But in reading my biochemistry book, the earlier Strider edition of biochemistry, it had a lot of just random facts, interesting history about the body and about the way that particular biochemistry or particular microscopic elements of the body were discovered. And in that book, it talked about how mitochondria were first discovered. The way mitochondria were first discovered, or some notion that they existed was first intuited, was they took heart tissue and they boiled it down. And unlike other tissue in the body, there was a really thick sheen of this particular fat, this waxy fat, what they referred to as cardiolipid. It was different from the other fats in the body because it was very waxy, it was very thick. And they didn't really understand what it was. These early anatomists also found the same cardiolipid in skeletal tissue, and they found it in the tissues of the central nervous system. But in the heart, it was very pronounced. What was it about the heart that had all this cardiolipid? Well, it turns out the cardiolipid is actually the fat that's sort of used as insulation in the mitochondria. So a mitochondria has, this is a very simplified form of it, but it has this kind of, and this is really just a schematic. I hope that you don't actually picture it this way. But the mitochondria has this it has these two kind of membranes to it. It has this inner mitochondrial space, which is the matrix, where a lot of very important activities, very important reactions take place. And then it has what's similar to like the cytoplasm that we find in other cells. And then it has this external mitochondrial membrane. But this inner mitochondrial membrane, it has a lot of this cardiolipid in it. It acts as an insulator, and what it insulates is it keeps these, if you'll remember in our last lecture where we referred to the horse, we talked about how the role of the mitochondria is to create this hydrogen ion gradient on the outside of this inner mitochondrial membrane. And that hydrogen ion gradient is actually what moves the wheel, the ATPase, the enzyme that creates ATP, that creates energy in the body. So this acts as the driving force there. But in any case, it was this cardiolipid in the mitochondria that was so prevalent in the heart. So right then, for me, it was a breakthrough. To my mind, that meant that there must be something that's very specifically, there's some specific relationship between the mitochondria and the heart. And when I started to look at that, it became very clear to me that if you were to find an organelle that fit well with the organ of the heart, that would be the mitochondria. So going back to the idea that kind of set me off on this little tangent here, what is it that allows our brains from one second to the next to suddenly, for one idea, for one frame of reference, for one experience to light up, and for another one to kind of fade away? What what shines the light on our particular experience? It really is the mitochondria. So in a neuron, for a neuron to fire, there has to be created this, you have calcium on the outside of the cell and potassium on the inside of the cell. And a gradient is created by pumping calcium out and pumping potassium in. All of that work of pumping things against their concentration gradient is done by ATP. And it's not the case that the mitochondria are just sitting around in a cell doing nothing and producing this ATP, just handing out this currency, and then the cell goes off and does things with it. Mitochondria actually move around. Within the cell themselves, they move around, and you don't have just one mitochondria in a cell. You have hundreds, or in the case of cardiac tissue, thousands or tens of thousands of these mitochondria within the cell. And what they're discovering now with advanced imaging techniques and the use of fluorescent dyes is the mitochondria move around. They come and they touch one another and they make little exchanges. After for instance, like a period of high exertion, like exercise in a particular tissue, whether it's the heart or whether it's the muscles of your calf, the mitochondria, they come together, and on these electron micrographs you can see all of these cristae. In my simplified version with these invaginations here, these are actually these cristae. On the electron micrograph, you can see that these cristae are actually they fill the inside of the cell. There are these long channels that fill the inside of the cell. All of these cristae are then kind of insulated by that cardiolipin that I talked about. But they'll butt up against each other, and at first, the lines of their cristae are just kind of doing whatever. But over time, each of them, their cristae will actually start to line up with one another. So these cristae and they snug up to each other, they cuddle up to each other, and these cristae start to align with one another, and they can do this in large groups. And while they're doing that, there's some sort of electromagnetic impulse that's being conducted along these cristae from one to the other. So there's some sort of communication of some kind that's taking. When I say communication, I'm not talking about they're not communicating the way that you and I are communicating necessarily, but information. In other words, a pattern of information, a particular pattern within the one mitochondria is being transferred and is being kind of adjusted to the information in the other mitochondria, because these mitochondria are very individual. They're very independent. So when we talked about the heart before, it was the organ of Junju. It's the Junju Zhiguan. This character, Jun, we talked about how it's often translated as sovereign. So this character is often translated as sovereign. The ruler is the Junzi is the sovereign. So this sovereign here, it has to do with the hand and the mouth, but the hand is holding some sort of writing instrument. So this notion of the sovereign was very much connected to this notion of intelligent communication, writing something down, or using your words to form, ideas. But this Jun is this kind of sovereign idea, and Ju here, literally, it's like a light or a flame, some kind of source of light or warmth. But it was a flame like a candle. So it was burning some type of wax, which I think is also kind of interesting when we're talking about that cardiolipin as being this waxy substance that in a way kind of maintains the imperial fire that we talked about in the first lecture in this series. That's this sort of Junju. But in talking about the mitochondria, they're unlike the other organelles in the cell that all seem to be responding to one another, and they all more or less kind of stay stationary and have things move to them. Mitochondria, thank you for coming. Mitochondria can actually move around the cells themselves, and they have something that looks like a social life. And they can leave one cell and go to another cell. There is no other organelle that leaves its own cell and goes to another cell. So these mitochondria are moving around in our body. And when we're thinking, and we have a eureka moment, and we get excited about something, we just won a prize, or someone that we love is coming to visit us, or the phone rings and it's someone you really want to talk to, and your neurons start to fire. What's actually happening is these mitochondria, they will actually migrate to areas within the neuron and start to release more ATP so that the neuron can be more excited, and so that those neurons can fire stronger and can create more of this kind of electrical impulse through the neuron. Now we talked about the junju. It's the junju zhiguan, and what emerges from it, what emerges from the official of the junju is this. This Shun Ming Qu Yan. Shun Ming Qu Yan, this Shun Ming, this character Shun, on this part on the right, we actually have this lightning bolt character. So this was originally written something like it was a picture of a lightning bolt, and this connection between kind of one pole or another. But it was very much the lightning bolt kind of descending from the sky. So within the body, of course, to my mind, that's any kind of a electrical impulse. And where I think most about electricity in the body is with the nervous system, the central nervous system, and just the nerves in general. So, when electricity was first kind of discovered or was in use, early physiologists would take electrical wires and they put them on a frog leg, a little gruesome, but in any case, they put wires on the frog leg and they could get the frog leg to actually contract, cause these muscles to move and whatnot. In our own kind of central nervous system, the thoughts that we're having, our intelligence, our mind, and even our experiences are somehow tied together with the triggering of these electrochemical responses. And it very much is an action potential that's released. It's an electrical impulse that moves through the brain and through the central nervous system that allows us to kind of think or experience things. And then the next part of this is, of course, this Ming, which is, Ming means brightness, but it's also like for something to become evident, or for something to become suddenly perceptible, is this Ming. So the Shun Ming, to my mind, Shun Ming, it's in many senses, it could be thought of as consciousness. This character Shun, which means spirit, and then this Ming, it's this spiritual brightness that emerges from it, but it's also this idea that the spirit, or the center of the spirit, is somehow, it becomes kind of evident, or we're conscious of it. So to my mind, that's similar to in each moment, our ability to kind of perceive the world around us and to kind of actually be there, so that the lights are on and whatnot. Even as a kid, I often wondered if you had some sort of elaborate machine of some kind that could create a person, say, atom by atom. You put them all together, exactly like a person that was right there next to you. You could duplicate them. They would, of course, respond and react the way that you and I respond and react to things. And they would have a memory, and they would probably have plans and all these other things. But would there be anyone inside? Would there actually, would anyone be in there actually watching? There'd be no way for us to know, of course, because we can't go in there and necessarily see who's there. But each of us, for whatever reason, I'm only assuming here, unless I'm going to delve into like paranoid schizophrenia or something, that each of us is actually also experiencing life in this same way. Even though on the outside there's not necessarily any evidence of that. And as children, of course, we often will often project this kind of theory of mind onto our toys, Many of us, when we're angry and we kick something inanimate in an effort to kind of vent our need for vengeance on the cruelties of the world, we're projecting this notion that there's somehow mind in this kind of inanimate object. I mean, for all I know, there is some sort of mind in that inanimate object, but it's something that, of course, I've puzzled about quite a bit. And this notion that the heart is this Shin or Shun is this metaphysical or abstract thing in the body. It forces us to have to at least try to wrestle with the idea of consciousness. Like many of you who've wondered about this, I've read a couple of books, and one of them is by an author named Douglas Hofstadter, called I Am a Strange Loop. Has anyone heard of this book? His most famous book is The Eternal Golden Braid, Gödel, Escher, Bach, in which he talks about how Gödel, who was a logician, mathematician, philosopher, who essentially proved that nothing's provable, that everything is essentially a self-reflexive loop. Anything in language and even in mathematics always simply refers back to itself. Escher, are you familiar with Escher's drawings? Where it'll be a hand drawing a hand, which is drawing itself. And then in Bach's music, in his fugues, he'll have a particular theme that kind of comes back and feeds into itself, almost like a sonic kind of fractal, and it builds on itself, and it creates this what seems like this elaborate living entity, but is this combination or this constant reiteration and constant kind of feeding back on itself, this self-reflection that creates his music there. Am I running out of time? No. So in that book, in Gödel, Escher, Bach, he touches on this notion of consciousness as being some kind of loop back on itself. But and I'm digressing in a way I wasn't intending to during this lecture, but in I Am a Strange Loop, he kind of shows how there's at least this possibility that consciousness is the result. That consciousness is in a way an illusion, but it's this elaborate illusion that's caused by all of these feedback mechanisms talking to themselves over and over again. And when you think about all of the neurons in the in the brain, I can't remember what the corollary is, but it's something like if you took all of the stars in our galaxy, it would be roughly the same number of neurons that we have in our brain, which is some huge number. But all of these neurons that are all creating these impulses, where you have these little social mitochondria moving around and creating these kind of bursts of excitement or energy, this fire, this electricity, that all of those kind of feeding back on themselves somehow sum up to kind of turn the lights on, so that we're actually there, so that there is something that we can see and that we can perceive. So let's see. I think I've hit on most of these. Yeah. I did want to say one thing. The way the mitochondria move about the cells, they don't have little flagella or things like that they can move through the body. They move along the cytoskeleton, which within the cell is this. It doesn't consist of bones. It's these long threads of collagen, proline and glycine, that are essentially invisible when you look at the cell, but they connect every corner of the cell with each other, and they also give the cell kind of its shape, and they create. It makes the fluid within the cell. Almost all of the water that's within the cell is kind of attached in some way, via hydrogen bonds to this cytoskeleton. In any case, the mitochondria use this cytoskeleton to move from one place to the other, and that cytoskeleton itself can actually conduct, electrical impulses very quickly. So when we're talking about the human body, for instance, when you're talking about acupuncture and its use within the human body, it doesn't. When you put an acupuncture needle into a particular point, you're not going into a blood vessel or a nerve or a tendon or anything like that. You're actually putting the needle into what is what in Western anatomy and physiology we would think of as like an empty space. But it's actually full of this fascia, of this collagen, the same collagen that communicates on a cellular level with the cytoskeleton within the body. And so in Chinese medicine, there's this idea that the qi is constantly flowing through this collagen matrix through the body, and information about health and disease in the body is somehow stored in this in these collagen fibers. So these large pockets of fascia that you find in places between muscles that can actually get very sore and tender when you press on them, if there's some sort of congestion within the meridian there. When you place your needle on that, you're able to communicate with the rest of the body all the way down into the particular organs. You're able to create some kind of response there. There is a line in the Yellow Empress Classic that says that all pain in the body is related to the heart. All pain in the body is related to the heart. That's interesting because if you look at the other organs of the body, for instance, the liver, once you're actually inside the liver itself, in the tissue of the liver, any number of things can be happening and you won't feel them. You may feel something, but you won't feel pain. When you feel pain with the liver is when the collagen sheath that's on the outside of the liver is actually disrupted or changed or torn. Then you'll feel excruciating pain. And it's the same for the kidney. It's the same for the brain. When the skull is actually opened up, you can take a probe or something like that and poke around in the brain and actually cause particular neuronal pathways to fire. So suddenly you're tasting chocolate, or suddenly you're remembering this day you went swimming with a friend as a child, but you won't feel any actual pain there. The outside, the collagen capsule that encases the brain and protects it, that is very painful to cause any damage to that. And the signals that are caused, it's not simply a matter of directly damaging the nerves. The nerves detect that the collagen fibers have been distorted or torn, and then they suddenly create this sensation of pain, and we feel this kind of pain in the body. So I'm trying to think of, oh yes, so in talking about the cytoskeleton, you have all of these hundreds of little mitochondria here. They can send this information from one, they can send kind of impulses, or one mitochondria can sort of communicate from one to the next via this cytoskeleton within the cell. And then they can move along the cytoskeleton and get together and huddle up and actually kind of greet one another and whatnot. This idea of the mitochondria, of their health and physiology, be related somehow to this kind of social aspect between mitochondria. So in a healthy human body, the mitochondria are moving and they're coming together and they're going off and doing their own thing. Also, mitochondria, they're all sort of individual in the sense that one mitochondria may have all of its mitochondrial DNA. Another one might just have, and many copies of it. Another one might have only a portion of that mitochondrial DNA. And it'll be dependent upon other mitochondria to get the proteins and information that it needs to build the genes for it to kind of operate correctly. So there's a lot of individuality from one mitochondria to the next. But in thinking about the health and disease of both the human mind and the human heart, it's very much tied together with our social lives. So having a healthy social life correlates very well with good heart health, just our own kind of heart health. So if you're experiencing some kind of stressful event or something like that, whatever it may be, and you keep it all to yourself and you isolate from the rest of the world, it has an effect not just on your mind, but on your actual physical heart. It causes the heart rate to become less variable, so kind of less free and independent, less kind of musical in a way, and it becomes more kind of a steady, repetitive sort of drone. And it can actually cause the heart to be under a certain degree of strain. It predisposes you to a heart attack. It predisposes you to heart disease over time. So there was a study of a town in New England that was primarily, and I can't remember the name of the study or the name of the town or any of that, but it was a town in which Italian Americans had moved from Italy to the United States, and they'd kept a lot of their culture from Italy. So everybody knew everybody else. Everybody knew everybody's business. Anyone, essentially, could go to anyone else's home, and they all knew one another. And so there was this very rich social life in that town. And there was a very low rate of heart disease in that town. And then in a neighboring town, the exact same diet, the exact same work, same socioeconomic status and all that, just without this kind of free kind of mingling from one person to the next, and this spending time with one another in this kind of congenial, cordial sort of way. There was, I can't remember how that sentence started, but in any case, in the town where there was this good kind of social life, there was less heart disease, and where there wasn't, there was more heart disease. And of course, when we think about our own mental health, it's very much dependent upon having good social ties with other people. So having friends, having kind of warm, cordial relationships with our family members and close friends, it doesn't just provide us with kind of momentary pleasure. It actually provides us with kind of mental health and with heart health as well.
Religion would be another one, right?
What was that?
As part of your balance, religion would be another one.
Thank you for bringing that up, because religion, this notion of religion, the virtue that emerges from the heart is this character here. Li. This character Li. It literally means ritual, but this part here is the same part that we saw in Shun. And this part here, anytime you see that in a Chinese character, it has something to do with like the spirits or the gods. It was actually a picture of, and I labored under like a lot of confusion about this radical for a long time, but it was actually a picture of some kind of whiff of smoke or something like that coming from this tripod kind of table. So it was like a table of something that could be erected, that could be put together, onto which offerings and whatnot were made, that would then be burnt, and then the smoke would rise up, and somehow that was a way that people had of communicating with the spirits. That whole idea, that whole notion, that whole practice, you find it all around the world. So those of you who've read Homer, like the Odyssey or the Iliad, there are all these references to how they would slaughter animals, and they would take the best parts of the meat or whatever, and they would put them on to the altar and burn them so the smoke could rise. Similarly, the early Chinese had similar practices where they would somehow make these offerings, these sacrifices to the gods, and that they would kind of be burned and go up into the air and become part of the somehow communicate with that aspect of the cosmos. But in any case, this character Li, it means ritual or rite. It was probably the most important, to my mind, it was probably the most important concept in the thought of Confucius's students. So Confucius himself was very much about this Zhen. Zhen was like a person and the number two. So it was very much about this compassion or benevolence, the way one person related to another person. But his subsequent students, especially Shun, he put a lot of emphasis on this notion of Li, and Confucius talked about it a lot too. This idea of Li is about being, it's like comportment, or it's like a ritual way of being. So it's like being polite or having manners. So a book that I read most recently was by James Gleick. He wrote Chaos. So if you've read things on chaos theory, you probably started with his book from like the 90s or something like that. But he wrote another book called Faster. And it's outdated now, because it was like from like the like the late 90s or something like that. So he's talking about fax machines and using the phone and whatnot, but it really fits with the ideas of today. How technology and the whole kind of push of society is to be able to do things faster and faster. And how when we try to do things more quickly, when we try to do things faster, one of the first things that goes by the wayside is manners. If you've ever been in a rush, you're getting on, you want to get to your plane, and you're late, and you have to get there fast, and you're hurried. You are no longer observing close. You're bustling past people. Maybe you're getting cursed at. Maybe you're on your way there. You're getting honked at. People are flipping you the bird because you're in a rush. You're trying to get there faster. And this notion of speed and of moving, of kind of going too fast is one of the first things that's talked about in the Yellow Empress Classic when it's discussing longevity in the human being. So in the first chapter of the Yellow Empress Classic, it doesn't go through a lot of herbal prescriptions or acupuncture points or things like that. The Yellow Emperor asks, how is it that back in the day, people would be able to live 100 years, their minds would still be intact, and then when they died, their spirits would kind of migrate intact elsewhere. And nowadays, people get to the age of 50 or 60, their minds are already deranged, and they have poor health. So this is 2,500 years ago. This conversation is supposedly happening, or 3,000 years ago. He's talking about how is it the people before were able to live a full 100 years and have this long health, and now they can't. And one of the things that Chibo says, he says, 不知持满. They don't know how to hold on to satisfaction. They don't know how to grasp and actually stay satisfied. 不识有神. They don't know how in the matter of like the time or the seasons on a daily basis or whatnot, they don't know how to manage their spirits. So their spirits are just kind of irrespective of time. And then 悟快其心. And they're always seeking, he ends it with, they're always seeking to quicken their minds, to speed up their minds, to speed up their hearts and whatnot. And I think this is really still like an admonition for today, because we find ourselves doing that. I mean, I find myself doing that. I'll get bored and I'm too tired to study, I'm too tired to do anything. I'll just go onto YouTube. And it's like, when I'm looking at the YouTube videos, if there's one there that's like longer than when I get really tired, if there's one there that's longer than like 2 minutes, I will not click on it. Because I don't want to wait 2 minutes to get to whatever junk it is, whatever puppy video or some guy crashing his boat or whatever trash it is that I'm looking at in my phone there. So this notion of this wu kuai qi xin, they're constantly engaging in affairs to quicken their hearts. When you think about the health of the mind, just going back to that chapter 1 there, and you think about the brain, if this were the brain and there are all these, this is of course just an idea here, but there are all these neuronal pathways, and let's say the distracted brain where you're thinking a little over here and then you're thinking a little over there, and you're looking at this over there on the internet, and then you're listening to the radio, and then you're doing all these little things here, and you're never really completing anything in kind of a meaningful way. It creates this disorganized kind of circuitry in the brain. And to my mind, it prevents us from ever kind of attaining like real mastery and attaining a real kind of place in the world as a completed kind of human being. But it also scatters us and makes us incoherent in a way. And I think over time, if my own personal experience is any judge of the matter, that if I continue to scatter and distract myself and have irregular habits, that at the end of my life, my brain, my mind will be very different than if I find a place for quietude, find a place for kind of meaningful communication with whatever higher kind of being or ideal that we want, that whatever you want to express it. If if I were to cultivate those types of patterns, that it would almost be like, it's like a fork in the road. I can either go into what will probably be like a confused state of dementia, or there's this possibility that through kind of effort and continued good habits and whatnot, I can preserve my mind, my Shun, and experience old age as a whole human being. Something similar to what Huang Di is referring to in his question there. So that's probably as good a place as any to end the lecture. Thank you for bringing up the notion of religion there. Yeah. And are there any questions about anything that we talked about here today? Or?
I have a question.
Yes, what is it?
When you talk about in the brain, when you get some feelings about something that makes you react and stuff like that.
Kind of excites it.
The thing that I was thinking about, the one time happened to me, I was about to drown. And when I was drowning, I was saying, God, let me live, and made a few promises. Yeah. But also, the life I guess, my mother that was very ill, I couldn't believe later on how much information I was processing.
Yes.
I think I was trying food in the past or something.
Yeah, and I'm sure that your experience of time changed. Like, however long that was that you're about to drown, your experience of time itself probably was altered as well. So like both time and experience are all somehow intertwined with that, whatever that is.
But the second one was the idea of I just left my mind. Is that something that you're talking about? Maybe I'm going in the fork road, and I'm doing all this bunch of little things, and my brain is going in that.
I really do think, and I think that religion, most religions, they have a Sabbath of some kind. They have a period of rest. They have at least a day of the week or some time when you put aside all of that stuff that is constantly distracting you and congesting you and tugging you in all these different directions. Set all that aside, you put on your nicest clothes, you get together with the people that are dearest to you, and you think and talk and kind of devote yourself to what is really important to you in this world. Being a good person, being a good member of your community, doing all of those kind of things.
The twins, I'm sorry, the twin idea to talk about when you have yourself and you replicate, make somebody else a clone or something.
Yeah.
I really agree with you because you have identical twins, for example, same experience.
Yes.
And they're really usually the opposites.
Yeah. And for me, the question is, does consciousness emerge? Is it an emergent property of the structure of the human body and brain, which is what Douglas Hofstadter suggests in I Am a Strange Loop? In other words, when you create this elaborate thing, the mind emerges from it. Or is mind some sort of transcendental thing? I mean, does our soul or our spirit kind of migrate from some other plane or realm or time or space, dimension, whatever, and inhabit this human body as if it were some kind of divine tuning fork or something that resonates? I have no way to actually, but there is a question there that is very difficult to answer. I mean, you can't really have one without the other, or can you? I don't know. I don't know. Anyway, thank you very much for coming, and I enjoyed this lecture very much. So thank you.